are live.
Okay. So let's answer, why might people be resistant to trauma-informed care?
It takes a whole paradigm shift. It means change of how we think about how we deliver services.
Yeah. And I think what I've encountered in my agency is that people, you're right, that they don't want to change and they think they're already doing a really good job and they want people to acclimate to the agency because we're providing this great service, so they should be appreciative. That's what I found, which is sort of worked when you think about it, but yeah.
Is that what you found out when you were doing your interviews?
Yeah. I mean, the social workers that I work with were on board, but I work in a healthcare agency for insurance and specifically for Medicaid patients. And yeah, it's it's really prevalent to think, well, they should just adjust and they're getting these free services, so why should we bend over backwards? Unfortunately.
So
how about you guys?
Sorry, I was trying to. Okay. I think maybe it's also due to they think it's more paperwork or there's more steps that they would have to do, and like I think it ties back to like where you think they already think they're doing a good job, and then maybe like also more paperwork, like why do I have to adjust this if kind of if we're already doing it, and then maybe also thinking that there'd be more paperwork or more steps that they have to do and they're already kind of happy. And also with the same thing, they're afraid of change. They're already comfortable to it. And I think it just kind of all, in a way, kind of all plays together, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So two parts of what I'm hearing you say is like one of like they want to feel like they're doing a good job. And so if like supervisors would say, we're going to implement this change, so, oh, well, I was doing a good job, so you just need to adjust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the other piece is like a sense of like, maybe a sense of control. Like I know what I'm doing, so if you implement this change, then it means I really don't know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. That is a really, really good point. Yeah. So in my agency, the champions for this cause have already been the social workers that have been in the field, but the adjustment comes really from our management, they're really business oriented, and from those people without like a social work education, they just seem to not understand. It's not that they don't have compassion and empathy, they're just so used to doing it a certain way that again, they don't want to change. So I would say in my organization, at least, it's really those in the behavioral health field that feel like change is necessary. How about you guys?
Yeah, I agree. Like all the social workers I talk to are on board. But like if you talk to just somebody general in the health field, maybe they feel like they're already doing it.
Yeah. How about you, Esmeralda?
I think it's the same to people I've talked to, like they're like on board and stuff. So I was only able to talk to a few still, and I'm still waiting on some. But most of them are on board for change, trying to get more informed and trying to work with the system and want to see changes. And I've also seen that they become frustrated with the whole systematic, changes or how long it takes to get something going on,
Yeah.
And I think we all kind of get frustrated with that, I know for sure. And so like, that's one of the things they've seen, like they would want to try to help out clients more or get more informed, but then it goes back to systems, or like back to the CEO, and just the process of politics, internal politics within the agency.
Yeah.
And so it's, and sometimes I think even more the ones that aren't direct, it's more like, oh, another training, another training. This is another training we have to do, like,
Yeah.
on top of all the other trainings.
It's interesting in my agency, they are implementing, I took the 8-hour training with Mandy in the trauma informed care, and that's why I decided to take this class, because I was so fascinated with it. But they're implementing in my agency an 1.5 hour long training, mandatory training for all 256 employees. And I'm anxious to see how they're going to put everything in an 1.5 hour training, and how people within the whole agency are really going to respond to that. So that's coming up next month. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear the feedback of like the resistance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think we sort of covered why might an organization be resistant to change. Do you have anything to add to that?
I read ahead on the Body Keeps Score, and the argument on the DSM. Like I forgot what the diagnosis was, but it was like a developmental trauma type diagnosis. They almost got that voted in, and then they decided not to use it. So now they have all of these diagnoses that cover up what the initial trauma is. So like, we'd rather have an explanation for the behavior on a surface level than get to the root of what the cause is.
Yeah.
And that seems to be like scientific thinking.
Right. Yeah, well, we see the same thing. I mean, in our reading this week, and I've worked in a residential agency too, and that's sort of in a substance abuse residential treatment facility. And that was what I saw when I worked there was, oh, we need to focus on just the substance abuse instead of looking at why did this happen in the first place and getting to the root of the cause. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Like, does it seem too complex for people? It seems more simple to me to think of that but maybe it's just it's like a hard leap for people.
Yeah. And I think so many people don't want to focus on the past. I mean, that was in our reading this week too. And I just, I don't quite understand that concept, because not that we should rehash everything that happened in our past. I mean, there is something to be said for moving on, but I think we need to look at that before we can move on. So that's my opinion.
I had another thought and I lost it. So it has to do with, okay, so the buy-in has to like come from the top down, and like, could it bring up fear? Like if we all buy into the concept that trauma is everywhere, we don't need to go where the trauma is, it's everywhere and it can affect us all. So if we start looking from that lens, would people encounter fear of their own trauma surfacing? Could that be a
great point? Yeah. And I think Mandy mentioned that too in the video about having it from the top down, and how they thought that having management in the initial meetings was going to be a bad idea, that people wouldn't be willing to share how they felt about their agency and the traumas that they've faced. But that in the end, it was important to have management there to really buy into it, because they're the decision makers, right? So,
or to help with the process, right?
Right.
To try to get policies in place or try to make changes within the agency, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know, I'm taking another class. I'm taking the racial disparities class, and that's really interesting because we're talking about buy-in in that class right now. And not everyone has to buy in to have policies implemented. just by doing the trainings, you know, I think it really plants seeds in people's minds, and they, just by having the policies and processes then to follow, it's not like they have to make this huge character change or a different way of looking at something, but it's just having those policies really helps implement things. So.
So how should we go forward with challenging resistance?
Again, I think just having a top-down approach, right, and implementing those policies and processes sort of forces the hand of people to get on board, hopefully.
And then there was one video we watched to move on. The people who are resistant, just move past them, because there's so many who are interested in doing this. So like if people are on board, then the people who were initially resistant will become interested.
Right. And hopefully see the change that's happening in their relationships with clients and their own coworkers. So that brings buy-in as change happens.
Maybe if they see the benefits, if they could see the picture of what healing and health looks like when you look from that perspective of what a difference that makes.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. So what are our own motivations? Are we all on board, or?
I'm on board.
I'm on board.
Me too. During the class videos that we had to do, are any of you guys in mine?
No.
I don't think so. Yeah. There was one person that was she was skeptical, and she said to me, or she said on the video, that they should just sort of get over it. And that there's going to be things that trigger people all the time, and so they need to learn how to work with it, which I found really interesting. So I talked with my coworkers about that too, and to just try and get their perspective. And there's some truth to that, I guess, but you don't want to re-traumatize people, because then how can they heal? And if they're triggered like that, how can they get the health care that they need? So
that's exactly the point. So if you're aware of, like, you're just sensitive to people's trauma, like services that could benefit people, they would not initiate because of being re-traumatized.
exactly. Yeah. So I'm totally on board.
And also the point that people who experience the most trauma are people from, like, who are systematically oppressed, like lower socioeconomic, and so it just, the statistics are stacked against like certain groups and poverty lines, and not that people who are better off aren't traumatized. It's just, we kind of have to, and maybe that ties into your racial disparities class, that we have to admit that we're systematically oppressing people and we're re-traumatizing people, and we don't want to admit that.
Right. And I think that's a really big issue. And it ties back to, well, we're already doing a good job, right? Well, maybe we're not. So, and that's okay to admit. It's okay to move forward. We should move forward in every aspect. So, yeah. And we learn more things, and agencies learn, and that's how an agency grows and doesn't stagnate. So,
do you think it's harder for an agency, like they're not able to, I don't know if admit that they're doing everything they can, or it goes back to that same, like, we think we are, but we don't, even though there's room for growth, they don't want to admit to it, kind of thing?
Yeah.
Where, you know.
I think both, definitely. It's really,
just goes back to that, like,
yeah.
And that could tie into funding. So if like their image isn't, if they meet the surface and say, oh well, our image isn't that so squeaky clean, like we're finding that we're traumatizing people. So would that like affect funding? And
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there is definitely a fear aspect of uncovering something. Yeah. Yeah.
so
Are we done?
one way I just had a thought to kind of like cap it all, like if we can be compassionate, include compassion to ourselves and agencies that we're working with to implement this lens, like we're not looking for fault. We all have like tendencies to, we're not doing some of it's just automated. Like we're conditioned, so we have to uncondition ourselves. So if we're kind to ourselves as we're doing this process, then maybe it'll be easier to sell this.
Yeah, I agree. And that comes back to my racial disparities class too, implicit bias, right? So it's sort of the same thing. Like we're putting these people, we're expecting them to conform to our way, the agency's way, instead of really taking them where they're at and improving instead of looking at ourselves.
Right.
So, yeah.
So
okay.
It's difficult to look at ourselves.
It is. It is. And then I think when you get like such a big group of people together, you even get more into this protective mode of, well, we're doing it right, and this is how we've always done it, and we're going to continue because look at the results we have, and not really digging deeper.
And it can bring up conflict, and people would rather not.
They're uncomfortable. Right. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
That was a great discussion.
It was.